My parents put keyloggers on my laptop, not to keep me safe, but to track my savings. Then they emptied $300,000 I'd saved for college. When I found out, my father just smirked and said, "That cash is now your cousin's tuition." I couldn't help but laugh because the money they took wasn't actually mine. Not really. I'm Oliver, 22 years old, and looking back, it feels like I was caught in a slowly tightening trap, completely blind until it was too late. This whole mess began long before the money vanished, but that's when things truly turned ugly. You might be wondering how any parents could justify stealing their kids' entire life savings, and how I even uncovered it. I'll get to that, but first, you need to understand my family. My parents, Mark and Elaine, always operated with a "we know what's best" mindset. They didn't yell or make a scene. Instead, they preferred a subtle, constant drip of control that made me second guess every decision. I grew up believing this was normal because it was all I ever knew. From a young age, they taught me that independence was a privilege, not a right. "You'll never get anywhere without us" was a common refrain, spoken casually. But the message was clear. They expected unwavering loyalty and obedience, not questions. This is precisely why I worked relentlessly to save for college. I was determined not to let them dictate my education or future. Starting at 16, I took every odd job available: babysitting, yard work, tutoring, anything that paid cash or good tips. I was incredibly disciplined, and by the time I graduated at 18, I'd amassed about $50,000. College was expensive, and the thought of asking them for help made me cringe. I knew they'd just use it as leverage to control my studies or school choice. That wasn't an option. So my plan was simple: keep working, keep saving, and fund everything myself. No fancy dorms, no new laptop, just pure grit. When I got my college laptop, I didn't think twice about the family settings or parental controls they insisted on installing. I assumed it was typical parent stuff, a way to keep tabs. I was young and naive. It wasn't until a year into school that things took a strange turn. My savings were steadily growing. I was proud. My bank accounts held over $300,000. Spread across different accounts and investments, all legally mine, earned through my own work and some smart side investments. I never told my parents about this money. I was careful. But my life began to unravel when my bank balance plummeted overnight. One evening, after a grueling double shift, I logged in to check my account and nearly dropped my phone. It was almost empty. Maybe a few $100s remained from what should have been hundreds of thousands. My heart pounded. I refreshed the page, convinced something was terribly wrong. I immediately called the bank, trying to keep my voice steady. They confirmed multiple transfers to an account in my cousin Ethan's name. Ethan, the family's golden child, who'd never worked a day in his life but always got whatever he wanted. I couldn't believe it. I sat back, trying to process it. A mistake. A hack. No. Everything clicked into place when I remembered the monitoring software on my laptop. The very next day, I confronted my parents. "Mom, Dad," I began, keeping my voice as calm as possible, "did you take money from my accounts?" My father leaned back, a smug smirk spreading across his face as if enjoying a private joke. "That cash is now your cousin's tuition," he said casually, as if that explained everything. I was stunned by their coldness. That money was mine. I worked for it, saved it, invested it. How could you just take it? My mother offered that fake, sweet smile she always wore when she was about to dismiss me like a child. "Family helps family, Oliver. You'll understand someday." I wanted to scream, but instead I just left. I felt helpless, utterly betrayed, and seething with fury. That's when I started digging. If they thought they could get away with this quietly, they were dead wrong. I wasn't going to let them ruin my future. I remembered the laptop again. If they'd installed keyloggers, then every password, every transfer, every message was logged somewhere. I meticulously scanned through files, emails, and hidden software on the laptop. What I uncovered was shocking. They hadn't just taken my money. They tracked every detail of my life through that laptop. Emails, messages, everything. They'd been monitoring me for months, maybe years. And worse, they were funneling my money to Ethan, who was apparently going to college on my dime. But here's the kicker. The money they took wasn't actually mine to begin with. When I first grasped that, it was a strange kind of relief. Like finally understanding the rules of a game I didn't know I was playing. You see, when I was much younger, too young to understand the implications, my parents insisted on setting up various trust funds and investment accounts in my name. They claimed these were my college funds, my nest egg, but they never gave me full access or control. The accounts were technically in my name, but they controlled everything behind the scenes. I just assumed it was standard parent behavior. They paid the fees, made all the decisions, and told me I should just be grateful. The more I investigated, the clearer the pattern became. The money was a mixture of my part-time job earnings, scholarships, and some early investments I'd made with my own modest income. But the bulk, over 70%, had been deposited by my parents over the years, mostly from family business earnings. And other sources I had no right to question. This was my first real clue. They had been laundering their own income through me, under the guise of helping me. In reality, they were using me as a front to maintain control and conceal funds from other family members and from me. But why the secret accounts, the constant spying? The keylogger on my laptop answered that question better than anything else. It wasn't just about money. It was about control, dominance, and keeping me firmly under their thumb. I found logs of conversations between my dad and my Aunt Meal, the one who always pretended to be on my side. They talked about keeping me in line, monitoring my every move, and ensuring the cash flows in the right direction. In those conversations, they called me naive, easily managed, and a placeholder. My parents were ruthless. I wasn't their child. I was a tool, a resource to be exploited for their benefit and for their favorite son's success. That's when the anger truly hit, but this time it came with a plan. Because now I had evidence. I took screenshots, saved logs, and copied files. Anything that could prove their theft and manipulation. More than that, I started watching them. Not in a creepy way, but like a trapped animal studying its captors. My mom was the master of subtle jabs. She'd accidentally comment on Ethan's brilliant future or lament how I never had the same focus. My dad, Mark, was colder, almost cruelly efficient, glancing at me like a disappointing investment. Despite this, I pretended to be completely oblivious. I acted like everything was fine, like I still trusted them. I kept my composure during family dinners, answered their questions politely, and never let on that I was onto them. It was exhausting, but necessary. Meanwhile, Ethan lived like a prince. New cars, expensive clothes, lavish vacations. None of it came from his own effort. It all came from the money they stole from me. They justified it with their favorite phrase, "He's the real heir to the family legacy," as if it granted them some divine right. I didn't just hate it, I was disgusted. Things escalated when I tried to reclaim some independence. I asked for access to my own accounts, only to be met with cold refusals and sly remarks about family honor and loyalty. I was told I should be grateful for their generosity, a sick joke. Around this time, I noticed they were monitoring more than just my finances. Emails about job offers, scholarship applications, Even personal messages with friends were being tracked. I wasn't just losing money, I was losing any sense of freedom. The final straw came when I discovered they'd been sabotaging my scholarship applications. I found email threads where my mom, with the help of an old family friend who worked at one of the colleges, had been quietly pulling strings to reject my applications or indefinitely stall them. They didn't want me to succeed. They wanted me dependent, controlled, and out of the way. But what surprised me most was my own reaction. I felt a strange detachment, almost like watching a play unfold. I wasn't naive anymore. I was angry, yes, but also strangely amused. The harder they tried to trap me, the more I realized how little control they actually had. Then came the conversation I'll never forget. It was after dinner, late at night. I confronted my dad again, more calmly this time, but with all the evidence laid out, screenshots, bank statements, the Keylogger files. His smirk was still there, but now tinged with irritation. "You think you're smart, don't you?" he sneered. "This family is bigger than you. Your money was never really yours. It was always meant for Ethan. You're just a footnote in the story." He leaned forward, eyes cold. "You don't own anything here." That's when I laughed, not because I was defeated, but because I wasn't. The money they took, it wasn't mine, not really. But the knowledge, the proof, the plan I had, those were mine. After that conversation, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just angry or hurt anymore. I was focused. For the first time, I saw my parents for exactly what they were. Manipulators who built their entire family narrative around control and entitlement, viewing me as little more than a tool to be used and discarded. I started keeping a detailed journal, not just of what they said and did, but of every suspicious thing I noticed, who talked to whom, when money moved, odd family patterns, and the little microaggressions that piled up daily. This wasn't just about reclaiming money. It was about reclaiming myself. At first, I was cautious. I couldn't just accuse them without solid proof, especially since Mark had a network of people in the family business and beyond. They knew how to cover their tracks, and they were good at it. I started small, testing their reactions. One afternoon, I accidentally left my laptop logged in while I stepped out. My mom, predictably, couldn't resist. She leaned in, fingers hovering over the keyboard like a vulture. When I came back, she quickly minimized the window she was looking at, but I caught a glimpse, a document titled Oliver Finances and Control. That confirmed it. They weren't just siphoning money. They had detailed plans on how to keep me in line, how to use my savings as leverage, how to keep Ethan on a pedestal. The more I watched, the clearer it became. My parents had created a family hierarchy where loyalty meant absolute obedience to them, and the price for independence was exile or punishment. One particularly sharp moment came during a family gathering at my Aunt Meal's house. Meal was the type who wore fake concern like a badge of honor, always smiling too wide and asking too many questions, then dismissing my efforts when I talked about school or work. That day, as the adults quietly talked over coffee, I overheard Meal telling my mom, "He's getting too big for his britches. We need to remind him who's really in charge." It wasn't my imagination. They were openly plotting to keep me controlled. When I got home that night, another surprise awaited me. My laptop had been tampered with again. This time, a hidden program was running, sending screenshots of my screen directly to an email address I recognized as one of my dad's burner accounts. It was like living in a fishbowl, but I wasn't going to drown quietly. I started encrypting my files using VPNs, setting up burner emails, and communicating through carefully coded messages with trusted friends outside the family. I began recording conversations whenever I could, just bits and pieces, but enough to build a pattern. All the while, I kept up appearances around the family. I laughed at their jokes, nodded when they belittled my ambitions, and pretended to accept the crumbs they tossed my way. I played the obedient son, the naive one who didn't understand the real world. But behind closed doors, I was meticulously building my case. One evening, reviewing all the evidence, screenshots of transfers, copies of emails, recordings of phone calls where my mom casually admitted to blocking my scholarship applications, I realized that to truly break free, I couldn't just confront them. I needed to outmaneuver them. I needed leverage. That's when I remembered something I'd stumbled on weeks earlier, buried deep in my dad's emails, an email chain between him and a local accountant discussing offshore accounts and investments made in my name but controlled by someone else entirely. They weren't just controlling my savings. They were hiding millions, funneling it through layers of shell companies, likely to avoid taxes or keep it from other family members. I might have been their pawn, but I was also a key to exposing a lot more. I made up my mind to contact a lawyer, someone specializing in family law and financial abuse. I needed a professional to help me untangle this web. But I also knew that if I made a move too soon, my parents would catch wind of it. They were always watching, always listening. So I started playing a longer game. I began planting little accidents, a missing document here, a corrupted file there, to make them question their own security. I sent anonymous tips to the family's business partners about irregularities I suspected. I carefully leaked pieces of information to trusted allies outside the family. Each small act was a chisel against the stone walls they'd built around me. One night, my father confronted me in the kitchen, his voice low and cold. "You're digging yourself a deeper hole, Oliver," he said. "You think you're clever? You're just a child playing a dangerous game." I looked him straight in the eyes and smiled. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm not the one stealing from my own son." His face hardened. "You'll regret this," but I wasn't afraid anymore. After that email to the lawyer, I waited. Not impatiently. Too much was on the line for rash moves, but with quiet determination. Miss Harding, calm and precise, was thorough and careful. We spoke over encrypted calls, and she advised me to keep gathering evidence without alerting my parents. Her first piece of advice was to completely secure my digital life, so I changed every password, moved all sensitive documents to secure cloud storage with two-factor authentication, and stopped using my personal devices for anything related to the case. But it wasn't just digital security. I focused on documenting the emotional abuse, the subtle but constant undermining I'd faced. I wrote down conversations verbatim, recalling every moment my parents belittled me or dismissed my dreams. I even recorded a few covert videos during family dinners where their true attitudes slipped out when they thought no one was listening. The more I compiled, the clearer the narrative became. My parents weren't just greedy. They were toxic in every sense. Then came the tricky part, using the evidence without tipping them off. I couldn't just confront them outright. They had power, connections, and a knack for spitting the truth. So I took a more strategic route. First, I sent a carefully worded anonymous letter to the board members of the family business. The letter outlined suspicious financial transactions involving accounts under my name but controlled by my parents. I included copies of some bank statements and emails as proof, but I made sure the letter came from an untraceable source. Within a week, I started hearing whispers. My dad was being grilled at board meetings, forced to explain sudden withdrawals and investments that didn't add up. The family business was in turmoil, and Mark's smooth facade was cracking. But he didn't back down. Instead, he doubled down, trying to rally support by painting me as unstable and ungrateful, a classic tactic to discredit dissenters. Around this time, I also reached out to my scholarship contacts. carefully clearing my name and explaining the sabotage in broad terms without naming names. They reopened my applications, and a few colleges reached out directly. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. Meanwhile, my mom ramped up her intimidation tactics. She began following me more closely, sending vague threats disguised as concerned messages. One evening, I found a note slipped under my door. Stop digging or lose everything. I didn't flinch. Instead, I began preparing my own response. I arranged a meeting with an accountant who specialized in forensic audits. Together, we started tracing the money my parents had siphoned off, following the paper trail through shell companies and offshore accounts. What we uncovered was staggering. Millions hidden away, funds that should have been declared as part of the family business assets, instead tucked into secret pockets controlled solely by Mark and Emil. I also discovered that Ethan, my golden brother, had no idea about these funds. He truly believed his lavish lifestyle was funded by legitimate family business profits, not by stealing from me. That realization sparked an idea. One afternoon, I called Ethan. I didn't mention the money directly. Instead, I told him about the scholarship sabotage and the manipulation I'd endured. At first, he was defensive. "You're just jealous," he said. "Dad and Mom always look out for the family." But as I calmly laid out some of the evidence, he started to crack. The perfect golden boy was far from perfect. He was a pawn too, just like me, caught in a web his parents had spun. I promised him I wasn't out to destroy him, just to expose the truth and take back what was rightfully mine. Reluctantly, Ethan agreed to meet in person. That meeting was tense. Two brothers, both used and abused in different ways, trying to figure out how to stand together against a family built on lies. The moment everything shifted, the moment I'd quietly been preparing for, finally arrived. Miss Harding, calm and precise, filed a formal complaint with both the civil court and the regulatory authorities that oversaw our region's corporate practices. She also initiated a civil lawsuit against my parents for financial abuse, misappropriation of assets, and long-term emotional manipulation. Everything we'd gathered, the paper trails, emails, wire transfers, and records of the Keyloggers, had been meticulously assembled into a dossier that laid bare the entire scheme. It was no longer just a personal betrayal. It was fraud. It was illegal. It was undeniable. Once the case became official and subpoenas were issued, the first hairline fractures began to appear in the pristine facade my parents had curated for decades. What was once held together by fear, appearances, and manipulation began to unravel in real time. At the preliminary hearing, I walked into the courtroom with Miss Harding beside me. Her presence was a quiet reassurance, but I was still nervous. My hands were cold, my stomach knotted. Then I saw them. Mark, my father, sat at the defense table with his lawyer, a man who looked like he billed by the hour and carried the arrogance of someone used to winning. Mark looked bored, smug, wearing that same self-satisfied smirk he always reserved for people he believed were beneath him. Even in court, even as the defendant, he projected superiority. Emil sat to his left, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes flicking around the courtroom like a trapped animal. She looked less like the polished, put-together woman she usually presented to the world, and more like someone who hadn't slept in days. She clutched her handbag tightly with both hands and whispered to Mark constantly, her voice low and frantic. The room was silent except for the shuffling of paper and the occasional clicking of a pen, but you could feel the tension. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, didn't waste time with pleasantries. She launched right into the evidence. As the documents were reviewed, the atmosphere shifted palpably. The judge's brow furrowed the deeper she read. Bank transfers routed through multiple accounts, Emails in which Mark discussed restructuring funds and redirecting tuition support away from my accounts. And then the Keylogger logs, proof that they had been reading my private communications, banking activity, and scholarship applications. Not even the most expensive lawyer could wave that away. When given the chance to speak, Mark leaned forward, adopting an air of exaggerated disbelief. "This is a family misunderstanding," he said. "It's unfortunate, but it's being twisted. We were trying to protect him from making poor financial decisions. It wasn't malicious, it was guidance." The judge cut him off. "Guidance doesn't involve installing illegal tracking software on your child's devices and siphoning 6 figures from their account." Meal tried her hand next. "We have always acted in his best interest. If there were mistakes, they were made. With love." Her voice cracked on that last word, but the performance didn't land. The courtroom wasn't buying it, and neither was the judge. What sealed it was Ethan. He hadn't planned to speak. In fact, he told me he was unsure if he would even show up. But on the day of the second hearing, he walked into the courtroom and requested to make a statement. He didn't look at Mark or Mel as he spoke. He looked at the judge and at me. "My brother and I were both raised in a household where manipulation was dressed up as concern," he began, his voice steady but strained. "I believed everything my parents told me, including that my brother was reckless, ungrateful, selfish. I see now that they created those narratives to justify what they were doing behind his back. I had no idea they stole from him, and I was unknowingly complicit. That cracked the final illusion of family unity, of shared values, of loyalty." Word got out fast. Local reporters picked up the story, and within a week, headlines started popping up online and in newspapers. Respected family business rocked by financial scandal. Parents accused of stealing son's college fund, the company's name, once associated with tradition and integrity, was now tied to deceit and abuse. Shareholders panicked, clients pulled out, board members resigned quietly to distance themselves from the scandal. The company's valuation dropped almost overnight. Back home, what little of it was left, I heard from neighbors and distant relatives that my parents were turning on each other. Mark, angry at being publicly humiliated, began blaming Meal for being careless with the hidden accounts. Meal, desperate to salvage what remained of her lifestyle, lashed out at both Mark and Ethan for abandoning her. They fought openly, something I never saw growing up. The tidy mask they wore for years had completely shattered. The court ultimately ordered the recovery and return of all misappropriated funds, over $300,000, along with damages for the emotional and educational sabotage they'd caused. Their personal assets were partially liquidated, and several of their properties were flagged for further investigation due to suspicious paperwork. As for me, I quietly moved out of the house. Within days of the final ruling, I didn't announce it, I didn't leave a note. I just packed, left the keys on the counter, and walked out. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I rented a modest apartment with clean walls and silence that wasn't oppressive. I spent the first few weeks just existing, without anyone watching, commenting, or criticizing. I reapplied to several schools with my reinstated scholarship offers and ended up choosing a university that had initially been my dream. I started fresh. My parents, I haven't seen them since. The final hearing, they didn't apologize. They didn't try to make amends. Instead, they receded into bitterness and denial, publicly blaming disloyalty and media manipulation for what happened. Mark tried to rally former colleagues to his side, but few responded. Mel attempted to file an appeal to unfreeze some of her assets, but the court denied her motion, citing continued dishonesty. My mother, who once texted me 3 times a day to comment on everything from my clothes to my spending, went completely silent. Ethan and I stayed in touch. He's still trying to unpack everything, but we meet for lunch sometimes. It's awkward at times, but genuine. We're rebuilding something small and honest apart from them. Looking back, I can say with complete certainty, I don't forgive them. What they did wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated betrayal. And when they were caught, they didn't regret the harm. They only regretted getting exposed. I don't want them in my life. I don't want explanations. I don't want reconciliation. I wanted my life back, and now I finally have it. Today, I have a growing savings account in my own name, an education no one can take away, and a sense of independence I was denied for too long. Sometimes I still hear about my parents trying to claw their way back into society's good graces, but their names are tarnished now, and they know it. They built their reputations on control and manipulation, and when those things were stripped away, there was nothing left but the truth. And that, to me, is the most satisfying ending. They lost the thing they valued most, their power.